Hey guys, Keir from Kegland, and today we're talking about some BrewBuilt bling. This is the new range of X3 tanks. So this is the third generation of the BrewBuilt tanks, which are essentially a range of pressurizable fermenters. This particular one has the new skinny Glycol jacket, which runs around the outside of the tank, so it can really effectively cool the tank. The new X3 range has a lot of different upgrades with respect to the flared legs. It's got the crossbar removed here, so you get easier access to the flex chamber. Also a lot more ports to deal with. So if you're somebody who wants the options down the track to put in lots of accessories like carbonation stone, thermo well, or sampling valve and stuff like that, or even a heating element into the cone, then all of this stuff is a lot easier. Also on the tops, there's full upgrades here for dry hopping, new upgrade to the new 8-inch TC lid, and also the entire external and internal of the tank is mirror polished. So I'm not sure if you know much about stainless steel, but mirror polishing is the absolute bee's knees. Firstly, it looks fantastic, and the other thing is it's way easier to clean and sanitize. It's known to be the most sanitary surface you can possibly work from is a mirror polish in the brewing industry. I know electro polish is a good surface, and by all means, you know, there's a lot of people who find that they like that matte look of electro polish, but really when you get a mirror polish like this, it is absolutely, you know, such an easy surface to work with. You get products like PBW or sodium bicarbonate based cleaners, and everything just falls off the surface. That Krausen ring, which is normally a bit stubborn, it just falls straight off because on that mirror polish, there's just nothing for that crap to sort of stick to. So it's a beautiful tank, great to work with, and we're so happy to have these in stock. So let me get into some of the details and features that this new tank has. So let's start by looking at the top of the tank. Immediately you see with the tops of these tanks, we're using the 8-inch TC. Now, one of the nice things about the 8-inch TC is it's a standard part. So this 8-inch triclover clamp and the 8-inch seals, they're easy to get replacements, for instance. So you know you're kind of future-proofed in that respect. The other nice thing about an 8-inch TC is it's very easy to hold pressure. So you'll notice that a lot of these older designs of fermenters and many other competing tanks that are out there will have a big ring clamp, hoop clamp like that. Now, those big hoop clamps, you know, they're nice in the fact that you can pull the entire lid off and you get full access to the inside of the fermenter, but they do come with a major constraint, which is when you have those big band clamps, there's a huge amount of pressure and force on that clamp itself, and it's really, really hard for them to make them hold pressure. Sometimes the seals fall out of place because they're so large diameter, and they're hard to really make hold pressure. So seeing a standard 8-inch lid really made me a lot more comfortable. The other thing is the 8-inch lid, it's still like easy to get your hand in for cleaning. So I wouldn't say you need any larger size anyway, but going with that 8-inch means that you're never gonna have a problem with these guys holding pressure. The other thing is it's just a big enough size where you can fit all these extra ports on top. So, you know, we've got a number of the 1.5-inch TC ports. So we've got a TC port here for the pressure gauge. As you can see, we're using a diaphragm pressure gauge. Once again, the highest possible standard on pressure gauges use a diaphragm because he's the most sanitary. So that's, you know, on there, which is good to see. We've also got the vacuum and a pressure release valve here. Now, it is really important when you start using these types of tanks to make sure you've got a vacuum pressure release valve, and especially if you start using pressure or chilling the tank down or crash chilling or using caustic soda, the vacuum is quite important to save the tank from an implosion. So always please make sure that if you're ever using any stainless steel tank, make sure you've got a vacuum and pressure release valve attached to it. But yeah, that comes basically as part of the kit. The other thing I'll mention is it has this standard 4-inch TC lid on the top here, so there's a smaller opening. Let's say you wanted to just chuck some yeast in the tank. You know, you might find it easier just to take off this small 4-inch lid and chuck the yeast in here rather than necessarily pulling the whole 8-inch clamp and the whole lid with all these other accessories on there every single time you need to get into the tank. So inside here, you can see you got that standard 4-inch opening. We've got a number of different you know, accessories which you can fit to the top here. This particular 4-inch lid here is made out of stainless steel, but if you guys are using a wireless type of, you know, let's say a pill hydrometer or some other sort of wireless hydrometer, you may find that these tanks make a perfect Faraday cage, and sometimes it's hard to get a Wi-Fi signal through the tank wall, especially if you're using one of those. So if you are interested in using a Wi-Fi type of device, you may want to consider using one of these plastic 4-inch lids instead. These act like a bit of a window. So as long as you've got some plastic on the tank like this, you can actually find that you can fit that type of lid on top of the tank, and the plastic will let the Wi-Fi signal get out of the tank much more easily. From the experiments that we have done, you can get, almost double the signal strength if you're using at least one small plastic part like that to allow Wi-Fi signal to get through. So important to remember that. The other thing we've got on the lid is this type of spunning valve. So this is a fairly large and commercial style of spunning valve. We also have some other ones in the future, like we've got a wrapped digital controlled spunning valve, which is going to come out in the future, so that'll start getting shipped around the world soon. We've also got our old blow tie spunning valves as well. This is one where it's got a little gauge and you can twist that in and out to control the pressure out of the tank. So whichever way you want to go, you've got a number of different options there. Once again, this also basically comes off using the 1.5 inch TC. So you can basically take that off and then remove the spunning valve. And because everything's sort of standard 1.5 inch TC on the smaller ports here, there's heaps of other accessories you could take off and fit there. Another accessory which is kind of nice to put on here is the hop bong. Obviously adds a bit of height onto the fermenter, but if you want to add dry hops into a fermenter like this, really you've got a couple different options. You've got the hop bong itself. So this is where you can purge the gas from the hops before they drop inside the fermenter. So you can use, for instance, a ball lock disconnect, put some CO2 in here, purge the hops, the gas out of the hops, and then open this valve to drop the hops down into the fermenter. So really a great way to do it without introducing, more oxygen, especially for those oxygen sensitive beers like your NEPAs or hazies or your IPAs, for instance, and especially if that is later on in the fermentation process when the yeast is starting to flock out. So really kind of cool accessory there. But let's have a look at this inside the tank, because this is what really separates the men from the boys. When you get these types of fermenters, it's very easy to polish the outside of the tank, and kind of like any manufacturer can do that and basically just polish this to a nice mirror finish. But where you see a really high quality tank, you'll be able to see that even these overhang areas underneath here, these are the hardest areas for you to polish really well. As you can imagine, if you're trying to polish this overhang, it's where you're going to see the cheaper tanks take a massive shortcut, and you'll see these overhang areas here can often be a little bit rough and nowhere near as good. And the problem with that is where you've got those areas you can't see, they're already going to be the highest risk of infection type of areas. And also, if you can't clean them as well, they're generally where you're going to get like some type of infection type of problem happen. So, to be able to look at these tanks and see that perfect mirror polish all the way down internally in the tank and in these hard to get overhang areas makes me so happy, because I know how hard it is to fabricate stainless steel stuff like, this well and to such a high finish in those difficult to polish areas. Looking at the bottom of the tank here, we've got 3 1.5 inch TC ports here. So for instance, we've got this one used for a thermo well. This is the BrewBuilt thermo well. It's got a 6.75 millimeter bore roughly through here. So pretty much that fits all the probes that we sell. I think the largest probe we've got is 6.5 mil, and most of them are like 4 millimeter, for instance, on most of the modern sort of products that we're selling. So yeah, that probe will work there. You can also fit a sampling valve. Now, look, it's questionable whether you want this sampling valve or not. Certainly this is very common in large commercial tanks, but personally, I feel that because you've got this ball lock post on the lid with a floating dip tube, I personally feel like this is a better way to draw liquid off the tank, because obviously this is taking the liquid from near the surface where you've got the clearest possible beer that's coming out of the tank. So I reckon this is really a better way to take samples in my opinion, but this also can be used for many other things. I've also got an additional port here down the bottom, and this one currently has a carbonation stone. So several ways you can do it. This is a large carbonation stone that we sell on our website, but you could also attach a carbonation cap here with a carbonation stone on it and actually send in oxygen or even like carbon dioxide into the fermenter using one of these ports on the flex tank. So in my opinion, I reckon putting the carbonation stone down here is preferable, because I do find that the carbonation stones which go into the tank and sit permanently in the tank, they have more of a tendency when they're sitting inside fermenting wort for a longer period to essentially block up, because yeast can grow inside the pores of the stone itself. So, really that's one option if you wanted to carbonate really fast, but just remember, a better option I think is putting the carbonation down on the flex tank. Now on the flex tank, if you have a look at this, This is a fantastic upgrade on the tank. So this is one of the only stainless steel, homebrew fermenters which will have a large 3-inch port. So as we're getting homebrewers use more and more hops or solids or things like desiccated coconut or orange rind or something like that, there's solids that people are using in these, really outrageous beers that everyone's doing these days, means you can start to block up dump valves pretty easily. And the other thing is, with the larger 3-inch port here at the base, that's such a large orifice that you can more effectively also dry hop using the flex tank as well. So I know a lot of you would prefer to use the dry hopping using the hop bong and going in from the top, but if you don't have one of these yet, for instance, or you're in a bit of a bind, then you could put hops in here, and because you've got that larger girth, hops can float up through the liquid, and it's easier to do. I know a lot of people did that on the older, smaller 2-inch valves, and sometimes they'd block up, but that issue is significantly reduced with a big 3-inch girth valve on the base. The other thing I should say is we've got a major upgrade on this side here. So you can see we've got a 2-inch port here, and this is where we have a heating element. So this particular heating element is our warming wizard. So we've got a couple different wattages in stock at the moment. So I've got like a 125, and then there's also a 500 watt element. To be honest with you, when it comes to fermenter heaters, I reckon less is more sometimes. So I would say the opposite if you're talking about a brewery or a hot liquor tank or something like that. I would say, look, go with the largest element you could possibly fit in there so you can crank that heat up real quick. But when it comes to fermenters, where you want to give it a gentle amount of heat, look, I think the 125 watt is ample in my opinion. So don't see any reason, even with a much larger tank than this, you go 2 or 3 times the size, the 125 watt is still probably fine. So yeah, so that's another really great product. And I'm also going to show you some of what we've got on the horizon with how these elements can work with our new glycol controller. So let's have a quick look at that.
So with these BrewBuilt tanks, to really get the most out of them, you want to have a really good heating and cooling type of solution. Now, previously, when we had our Glycol chillers, most of our Glycol chillers would look something kind of like this. This is sort of a model of our G20. We also had a G40 Glycol chiller as well, which was, also pretty popular. But this type of solution had a few limitations. I mean, on the back of the Glycol chiller, we had a temperature controller at the back here, which basically you'd set the temperature, and that would set the temperature of the glycol sitting in the bath of this temp controller. And then on the front of the unit, we'd have a couple different output temperature controllers here. So essentially, on the G20, you'd have up to 2 temp controllers on the front, and essentially, depending on the set temp you would put into these digital controllers, that would essentially, cycle a pump inside the glycol bath here to pump glycol through either, output number 1 or output number 2, for instance. So I guess one of the limitations with this is when you buy the Glycol chiller, you've kind of got this, standard number of outputs already mounted on the Glycol chiller, and it's not easy to kind of expand them beyond that point because every time you want to expand another one, you would have to have another pump in there, for instance. And if you've already, let's say, got the G20, which only had 2 pumps, then if you bought a third, BrewBuilt tank, for instance, then you'd kind of be out of luck. You'd have to basically get rid of this Glycol chiller and buy another, larger G40 with 4 outputs. Conversely, another problem is if you got the G40 and you only had 1 tank, then you would have sort of these redundant temp controllers and pumps in there, which would have increased the cost of the Glycol controller or the Glycol, chiller itself, and you're only using one of the controllers and 1 pump. So you're sort of paying for, this extra utility on a device that you're not actually getting any advantage of, I suppose. So, that was kind of like a little bit restrictive, I guess you might say. But with the new solution, what we're starting to do is actually have the control device here external to the actual Glycol controller. So the Glycol controllers in the future, what we're looking to do is just have this 1 temp controller on the back and a pump which essentially sits there and just supplies pressure to these Glycol lines on the outside of the unit. So if you wanted to expand more tanks, essentially what you would do is buy 3 or 4 or 5 fermenters or whatever, and each time you buy an extra fermenter, you would get an extra Glycol and temperature control box like this, and it's all plug and play. So essentially, you only need 1 big pump in here which feeds the Glycol to a pressurized line. You can tee off that pressurized line as many times as you want. You keep running more T-pieces or more outputs on the side of the tank and just supply it to more of these Glycol controller boxes. So when you look at these Glycol controller boxes, essentially they're kind of similar to our wrapped temperature control box, but essentially this one controls glycol using a pinch valve on the front of the unit. So a hose, a silicon hose in this case, runs straight through the pinch valve, and this pinch valve is basically driven by a servo motor which pinches down on the hose itself to basically reduce that glycol flow to the tank. So the beauty about doing that is it's not a pure on or off. What we can do is use a PID function in the glycol controller to reduce the flow to the tank, and that PID function, it's quite handy in this instance. There's a lot of instances where I think PID is kind of like overused in home brewing, and I think a lot of instances not really necessary. But with glycol in particular, especially where you've got, let's say, -1 degree glycol, if you're pumping that through a jacket, which is several liters in size, you can very, very easily overshoot and accidentally overcool the jacket or fermenter by pumping too much glycol through the tank. Even if it's only for a few seconds, you can easily overshoot that set temperature and overcool it. So I think for this type of application where we're talking about glycol cooling, a 20, 30 or 50 liter fermenter or something like that, I think a PID, especially the P coefficient or proportional coefficient, is really handy to make sure you don't overshoot that set temp. The other beauty about this is it really gives us a fully encompassing, heating solution as well. So previously, on these temp controllers, we had onboard relays where you could basically have behind the scenes here, there was a vacant relay which you could wire up a heating device, but that would require someone to then wire something up into this this unit, and that was AC power. So not everyone's so comfortable with hooking up AC power relays and stuff like that, because the wiring could be a little bit dangerous if you're not sure what you're doing. But obviously with this type of solution where we've got this red cable plug hanging out of the bottom of the glycol and temp controller, and we've also got the BrewBuilt now with this 2-inch TC port where we can stick in the warming wizard. This heating device can go straight into the cone, and then just using a standard IEC cable, plug that in like this, and this plugs into the base of the temp controller. So we've got one of these wrapped enabled glycol and temperature controllers, and you could mount that to the wall, for instance, like it is shown here, or hopefully in the future we may even have some solutions where this can go on the side of the tank as well, so you can hang it on the front of the tank. And the other beauty about that is you've got a really nice display here which shows what's going on inside the tank. So you've got the temperature displayed. You can even put a graph on the display of that controller. And if you're using the wrapped pill hydrometer, the other beauty about that is you can chuck the pill hydrometer in here, and typically, getting a signal out of these stainless steel tanks can be tricky, especially if your router in your house, like your internet router, is several rooms away. Getting a signal through the wall of this double wall stainless steel tank, it's almost like a perfect Faraday cage really, and getting a signal out of the tank to your router can be difficult if your router's especially a little bit of a distance away. But the beauty about this type of solution is if the wrapped glycol and temperature controller like this is very close to the tank like it's shown here, then the signal only has to get a short distance and then get to this device here, and then the temperature and glycol controller sitting on the outside of the tank can relay that signal to the internet much more easily because it's not sitting inside a stainless steel tank. So if you're doing that, you'd obviously need to put the wrapped pill into the fermenter in Bluetooth mode. So it gives a Bluetooth signal through the wall of the tank and then gets to the temperature controller, and then the temp controller does that heavy lifting up the internet. That is also an awesome way to also use the pill as a temperature probe as well. So it's good to have a backup probe here, because that way we've got some redundancy. But then what you can do is set on the glycol and temperature controller the actual pill temperature, because that's sitting right in the middle of the fermenter. It's getting one of the best possible readings right in the middle of the core of the fermenter, and then use that as the set point. So that is a much easier solution, easy to expand. So you just buy another temp controller every time you buy another fermenter, and also gives you way more functionality, I think. And it's a lot easier, ergonomically, looking at a screen which is either on the wall here or on the front of the tank, rather than this confusing situation, especially if you've got a number of hoses running to multiple different tanks, and trying to decipher, which of these screens here relates to which tank itself. Because, so I don't even think the location of these temp controllers, having them on the glycol chiller itself, was really that ergonomic. So I think this new solution with the BrewBuilt tanks will be an awesome one. Obviously these new wrapped glycol and temperature controllers will work with other fermenters as well, as long as you can plug a heating device of some sort into this AC heating socket here, then they'll work fine. But I think this type of solution with the BrewBuilt tank on the horizon is a fantastic option for those people looking for a full encompassing heating and cooling solution.
Well, that's it, guys. Hope you enjoy using the new BrewBuilt X3 tanks. I think they are absolutely one of the best quality and highest finished tanks I've ever seen in my life. So if you're looking for a stainless steel Uni-Tank, this bad boy is definitely the one to go for. I should just say, word of warning, when you're using pressure, it is a little bit dangerous, so you just have to know what you're doing. And really the most common thing is people don't realize that they have to release all the pressure before they open any of the ports. So just on the back here, we've got this orange PRV. Make sure to always pull that up. Really simple, just pull that up, make sure there's no pressure inside. There's also obviously a warning right on the front here, but I'm just gonna state that again just in case somehow the warning label gets washed off or something like that. So before you open that lid, just think, pressure release valve first, take that off. The other small thing I'll say is just remember pressure can, build up in this flex container here as well. So, if you shut this butterfly valve, essentially you could have sugars and yeast in here. Well, more likely you're gonna have sugar and yeast in here of some sort. It's gonna keep fermenting and you've gotta allow the pressure to get out of here somehow as well. So if you turn that off, always remember, remove this at the same time. So that's it, guys. Hope you enjoy using this amazing tank. If you really want to see all of the cool new stuff that's coming out, bottom right hand corner, hit subscribe now so you find out straight away when we bring out any cool new gear or bring in new BrewBuilt stuff for that matter. And also join our Facebook Homebrew community group. There's heaps of guys just like yourself sharing tips and tricks on how to use the gear. All right, that's it, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.